Welcome to Learning Plan 4. This unit we'll be looking at using Excel to take a look at pivot tables. This is something that industry has asked us to share with our students as a skill that employers would like you to come to the job with. This is used most often to pull specific data out of very large data sets. For our example, we are going to actually use a small data set. Let's begin by leaving our data that you see on the screen. We're going to leave it in its own separate tab. But I'm going to go ahead and rename that tab just by right-clicking on the tab and saying rename. I'm going to call this my payroll register. And I'm going to go over to sheet 2. I'm going to rename this one too. I'm going to say data by gender. And we're going to do a third pivot table as well. So let's rename this one data by department. So we've got our original data here on our first worksheet. On our second worksheet, let's begin by taking a look at how to construct a pivot table. So constructing a pivot table is not too bad. What you're going to do is go along the top here and select Insert. And then you'll see Pivot Table. So go ahead and grab your pivot table. And to create a pivot table, it's going to look for you to tell it where you want your data range to come from. So just because we're on a new worksheet doesn't mean we can't go to the original worksheet. So our cursor is blinking here. We're going to go ahead and click on the first worksheet. And we're going to select all the data, even the headings, because the pivot table is smart enough to identify headings. Okay? Now, if we hadn't already created our new worksheet, we could do it here and say choose a new worksheet. But since we already created an existing new worksheet, we'll leave it in existing because it's going to bring us back to where we started our pivot table from. So let's say OK. Now, another thing to point out is that whatever cell was highlighted in your worksheet is where that pivot table is going to drop. So just something to note. So here you can see we've got a blank pivot, we've got a blank data field. Over here on the right-hand side is where you can choose which types of data that you're looking for. And it does matter what order you click the boxes. So we're interested in gender here. So we're going to start out with gender, and you can see over here on the left the gender filled in. We had two choices, female, male. Next, we're going to take a look at salary, and lastly, bonus. And look at how it's just pulling in and summing for us the different types of data that we've selected. And that's what we're looking for here. So I'm just going to enter our escape out of here. Now, maybe you don't feel very good about how easily and quickly that was done. So let's go back and do some double checking. If we look at our original payroll register data file, the two items that we pulled out of here was salary and bonus. So I'm just going to highlight all the salaries and see what total my data set has. It has 559,000. Okay, I'm going to go back to my pivot table, which I just created. And my grand total that got pulled into my pivot table was 559,000. So I'm feeling pretty good that this worked. Let's go back to the payroll register and do the same for bonuses. I've got a sum of 24,300. I'm going to go to my sum of bonuses. I've got 24,300, and then it did total it for me here. So this is just one way to slice and dice the data on the first worksheet. Let's do it a different way. Let's go ahead and set up a new pivot table. So I'm going to click in that first cell, Insert, pivot table, go back to my original worksheet and grab the same data, keep it in my existing worksheet and say OK. So this time, I don't really care about gender. I'm going to take a look at department, salaries, and bonus. So now with the same data, I'm looking at it from a very different perspective. Now I'm just saying, well, which departments do we, what are we spending in salary and bonus by department? Okay. Hit enter. And we can see we've got the same grand totals coming across, so it looks like our pivot table pulled all the information. Now, if you wanted to start over when you had that pivot table up, you could have just unclicked all the buttons and then re-clicked in the order that you were looking for. Just another hint. If you happen to get into it and you maybe click the wrong data set, just go ahead and unclick all of them and then start over. I think that this is pretty apparent that if you were working with a large company, your data set on this original payroll register, you could have 150 plus employees easy. So I think it's kind of nice to see how you could quickly pull out different totals, like by department, by using a pivot table. So this is a very simple introduction to pivot tables, but do spend the time getting comfortable with them so that when you're asked if you're familiar with them, you can say yes. And this concludes Learning Plan 4. Thank you for joining me today.